We are also recording this session, so all those who have missed it can also look at it. We are also live streaming ourselves on the Redemptorist Media Center page, that's the YouTube page, as well as the Bangalore Archdiocese. So before we move forward, it is our honor and privilege to have with us Father Dr. Richard D'Souza, scientist and astronomer, and he comes all the way tuned in from the Vatican Observatory in Rome. It is also our honor that we have with us Reverend Dr. Peter Machado, Archbishop of Bengaluru, who has made a big, substantial change and impact in our society. It is also with honor that we invite our special guest for today, Dr. Sister Arpana, who is the principal of Mount Carmel College and also from the Xavier Board of Higher Education in India. We have Mr. C. Alphonse Prabhakar, the former scientist from ISRO. He's got a very impressive profile, which we will speak about. May I request the admin kindly mute everyone else? We also have none other than Dr. Father Victor Lobo, and I think he needs no introduction. He is the principal of St. Joseph College right here in Bangalore, and they have been in the news of late for making huge strides in taking leaps and bounds in the education system. Over to you, Shekhar, to move this forward. Shekhar, sorry, we cannot hear you.
Yeah, I'll have to unmute myself. Yeah. This is the virtual world. We are living in a world of mute and unmute. And I managed to get a smile out of the next person I'm going to introduce. That is, we've got Father Richard D'Souza. He was born in 1978 in Pune, India. His initial schooling years were spent in Kuwait. From 1990, he moved back to his home state of Goa, India, and joined a school. After finishing his schooling, he entered the Society of Jesus in 1996 and finished his 2 years novitiate in Belgaum, India. What is interesting about Father Richard D'Souza is the fact that he's interested in studying the formation and evolution of galaxies, in particular through observations and relations. He studied the outer stellar halos of galaxies in order to decipher their secretions. So without any further ado, I would like to welcome Father Richard to this wonderful platform. Thank you, sir. Thank you for joining us. And if you were in a live platform, if you were live in person, I'm sure all of you would be clapping. So please show your appreciation using the emoticons you have around you. You could clap for him. You could do it virtually, but let's welcome him because he's tuned in from Rome, if I'm not mistaken. Right, Samira? Thank you, sir. Yes, Ibra, over to you.
Okay. Good evening, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Special greetings to Excellence Bishop Machado. I remember our time in Belgaum together many, many years ago when we started the community college at St. Paul's. And also to the many of the other esteemed guests here today. I wanted to just briefly, not knowing the audience for today, just briefly convey 3 ideas out to you in a sense that knowing that many of you come from the educational background and are influencing and will be influencing a whole generation of students. I thought it would be best then just to talk briefly about what we do in astronomy. Why does the church do astronomy? Why does the Vatican interested in astronomy? And how we can communicate science, research and astronomy to our kids, to our children, to our students. Just a brief question. Is it possible to share my screen to show some slides? Right now, it's telling me that it has been disabled.
Sure, definitely. May I request Mr. Bambino?
And while we're doing this, I'd like to request everybody, please tell your friends, colleagues, well-wishers to join us on this platform. because this is going to be a very, very interesting discussion, which we're having in the next 1 hour. And we would love all of you to join in on this particular platform.
Okay. In order not to waste any time, let me start talking while the technical staff work on this. One of the things which we must remember, partly because I do astronomy and astronomy is one of the themes which we will be talking today, is that since the beginning of time, since the beginning of humanity, of civilization, various cultures have looked up towards the night sky and wondered. We have had the ancient Indian civilizations, we have had the Egyptians looking up, we have had the Chinese looking up, we had the ancient Persians. And all these civilizations had a certain wonder for the night sky, the wonder for the heavens. In fact, one of the things I often do as a hobby and in my spare time is to give public talks to people of various groups to show them the night sky through a little telescope which I mount in the corridor, mount in the courtyard. And one of the things we do when we show them the night sky, and I will now quickly show you my presentation, is we show them various things in the night sky, the heavens. And whether you are a kid, maybe in Belgaum or in Bangalore, moving away from the city into a very dark part of the countryside, and look up, and you begin to see and discern the planets or the stars and the various objects in the night sky, everyone is suddenly amazed and seized with wonder. I've done this with various groups. I've done this with kids. I have done this with my fellow priests, and I have also done this with various of my colleagues, scientists. So whether you're a professor at the IIT or whether you are a rag picker on the streets of Bangalore, if you look up at the night sky, everyone goes, wow, and looks at wow. And the question is, what is this in the night sky really which makes us go, wow? Why is this sense of amazement for the heavens? Across cultures, across society, across levels of education. I like to point out, my way of explaining this is through this photograph or this image of Michelangelo, which he painted, and which many of you know, on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. It's an imagery taken from the Bible. It's supposed to depict God creating Adam. But if I could turn it around and look at Adam or humanity reaching out towards God, towards the transcendent. A very famous theologian, Karl Rahner, once described humanity as being transcendental beings. We are all that is, it is within us, there is something which wants to reach out, just wants to reach out to the beyond. Now, in this image, Michelangelo shows Adam is reaching out towards God. But think of everything beyond that. And you can imagine that astronomy is the most transcendental thing you can think of, the most thing beyond who you can think of. And so in a certain sense, in observing the night sky, in studying the heavens, in studying to understand more, in doing research, we are actually fulfilling the very nature of us, which is we are made in the image and likeness of God. We are made to be transcendental beings. And by transcending, by reaching out to go beyond us, reaching out to the heavens, trying to understand the heavens, we are actually being what God has made us to be. So I like to point out that this is the one reason I like to explain why across cultures, across societies, everybody has tried to study, marvel, and understand the heavens. But I like to also point out that any form of research, whether it be in the other sciences, in the natural sciences, in the social sciences, but even things like when we study the arts, when we study the music, when we study literature, these are all expressions of this very transcendental nature of the human, but to reach out to the beyond. I wish that this understanding is transmitted to our kids, that they are not meant to be satisfied with the very immediate, with the very ordinary, with the way life is, but that they should be always searching to go beyond themselves. And if astronomy is that sign of the thing which is the most beyond, then everything else that we do in our human lives should be an expression of this search to reach out to the transcendent. This is my first message which I bring. Astronomy has always been interesting to humanity. They've always tried to understand the heavens. And now everything we do is an expression of this transcendental nature of human beings. Let's go a bit ahead. The second message I would like to show you or to explain to you is what is the meaning of doing science and research. Unfortunately, when I was growing up in India and doing my schooling, I never really understood what science is and what research is. It's partly because of the lack of exposure that we had in those days. I'm hoping that things have become much better. But for me, when I studied science, I was taught that science were a bunch of laws which I read in a physics, chemistry, or biology book. And that I had to study these laws. And these laws were kind of given to us by the scientists. But I'd like to point out something else. This is not what science is. This is exactly the opposite of what science is. Science is not given. Science is something where we try to challenge existing knowledge and try to enlarge it. We try to unlearn what we have learned in the past and try to learn what we learned, try to learn something new. So let me try to give you an example very briefly from my field of astronomy. So I'm going to take you on a very fast journey through the cosmos and just give you a glimpse. You start to understand you are not trying to understand in detail, but having a flight which is 3,000 feet above the air and kind of looking things from about a broad view of things. So let's see. We all know that we live in a galaxy, and this galaxy is a Milky Way. And if you have been lucky to look up at the night sky and look at this band across the night sky filled with stars, you know that we live in a Milky Way. And this Milky Way, as we know, it has billions of stars. Now, the Milky Way is a galaxy. And if you had the imaginary way of actually being able to leave the galaxy and look up, down, you will see this image of the Milky Way. This is an image of another galaxy which looks like the Milky Way. And our sun would be some distance away from the center of that galaxy. The galaxy is really huge. Let's not try and comprehend how that is right now, but so that we are able to the galaxy. But there are millions and millions of galaxies. And then if you look ahead, you will see that the most closest galaxy, which is the size of the Milky Way to us, is another galaxy famous, and most of us probably know its name, but probably don't know what it is. It's called the Andromeda Galaxy. And it's really, really far away from us. And people have known this for a long time. People have known this, that we live in the Milky Way from the 1930s, and that the Andromeda Galaxy is very, very far away. Now, one thing is when we look up at the night sky, we see sometimes galaxies coming together. They're almost like they are merging. They're almost like they are one big galaxy, which you see over here, which is called the M51 galaxy. It's kind of eating up another galaxy. And therefore, we learned over time that galaxies actually grow in time. They become bigger and bigger. And because of the laws of gravity, they actually attract each other. And the bigger ones eats the smaller one. If you would like to give you an example how to think of this, for many of you who live in the business world, you know how mergers work. Big companies eat smaller companies, and that's how they all grow over time. So similarly, galaxies eat smaller galaxies. So this is what we all know. Now, many years ago in the 70s, people looked in the night sky and saw these galaxies which were coming closer to each other. And what they pictured was that they kind of put a sequence of various galaxies which were coming closer and closer together to understand that result. And what they realized is when two galaxies, which are like disk galaxies, when they start merging, they lose their shape and they become a roundish galaxy, which is called an elliptical galaxy. So on your left, I'm showing you the picture of Andromeda. It is a disk galaxy. And by banging or hitting with other galaxies, they become elliptical galaxies. So the common idea, the common knowledge, which we had in astronomy, was that when two galaxies merge, they become a round, kind of a sphere of stars. They lose their shape. This was what I learned in my astronomy textbooks in university. And the question is this true? Why is this true? This is what science told me 25 years ago. Science was 25 years old, and which I learned. And the question is this true? So I went about trying to understand our closest neighbor, which is called the Andromeda. Now, around the Andromeda galaxy, if one had the magical ability to look very deeply, one would realize that the Andromeda galaxy is actually much bigger. So the big galaxy which you saw there, I made it smaller in the center. So now it's right there in the center. But if you had the magic ability, you would see that there is actually a small swathe of stars, very faint. And if you have very good telescopes, you can actually see it, this faint of stars which are around the galaxy. And people for a long time were wondering, oh, that is a lot of stars. So this we learned in about 2007, when this image was first taken. And we understand, what is all those stars around the Andromeda galaxy? So along with my team, which I set out with another colleague, I tried to understand what is this thing which is called the stellar halo. It's like a halo around the Andromeda galaxy. And what we were trying to set out is to understand, yes, we understood that this halo must be other galaxies which are falling in and breaking up and being disrupted and disrupting everything around it. So can we actually understand what fell in? What is it that fell into the Andromeda galaxy? Surely it must be smaller and smaller and smaller galaxies. Because if it was a large galaxy, Andromeda wouldn't be a nice shape, as I showed you in the past. It would be a nice disk galaxy which was rotating in the past, rotating as it is now. If it was a big galaxy which was falling in, it must have changed shape. But right now, it's a nice disk galaxy, and all these swathe of stars around the Andromeda galaxy, which means that there must be thousands and thousands of smaller galaxies which fell in. And so but it's really a lot of amount of stars around it. So we were trying to figure out what we call as the accretion history of the galaxy. Which galaxy did M31 eat for dinner? That was the question we wanted. What did M31 actually eat for dinner? Now, we put the things together and we realized that no, it was not made up of many small galaxies, but in fact, the galaxy which fell into M31, or which you see on the right, M31. So you see a small inset of the M31 galaxy, then you see the large swathe of stars around M31 on your left. And you can see that M31 was actually, so 2 billion years ago, I show you the image on the left. And as it is moving now slowly towards the right in time, and another galaxy falls in, gets disrupted, gets destroyed, and provides this big swathe of stars around it. And mind you, the point was that it's not thousands and thousands of small galaxies, but one very large galaxy. And that galaxy was almost the size of the Milky Way. So this was completely new. It was completely different from what people thought in the past. Just to make you understand what this means, I'd like to give you an imagery. I'd like to give you two images. So what we are trying to do is think of you imagining that you have bought a brand new BMW car. And the BMW car you show to all your friends and it's really brand new. A week later, when you begin to show it again to your neighbors, you realize there is a small dent on the BMW car. And you realize that somebody has either dashed it, you infer that somebody has scratched it, somebody has bumped into it slowly, but there is a small dent. 3 months later, you realize there are a couple more dents in your BMW car. And you can realize, oh, you infer more things actually fell in. Finally, 3 years later, you walk out of your front door, you look at the car and you see it's fully dented. And then you begin even like, oh, wait a second. This couldn't have been, this damage couldn't have been done by bumps, by small bumps. Really something large should have come in and crashed into it to create that big debris of your BMW car. In a similar way, we look at this galaxy of M31 and try to infer its past. My point is this. So let me move to the second imagery. By this, returning back to the imagery of big companies and them merging with smaller companies, what we discovered was like saying, I'll try to translate it into the business world. So let's say you have a large company like Google. Okay, it's a really large company. It makes millions and millions of dollars every year. And now suppose the CEO of Google decides, hey, I want to grow my company by 50% in the next 3 years. And he realizes that he can do this in two possible ways. He can do some investments and they can do some research and grow slowly. But if you do that, you will grow very, very slowly. Then you can say, oh, the size of our company, if I want to grow by 40, 50%, I could also merge with other companies. That could be another possible way. I could eat them up. But then it would make sense to buy a whole bunch of smaller companies, because you would have to be buying maybe thousands and thousands and thousands of these smaller companies to grow by 50% at the size of which Google is. The only way which Google could grow by 50%, if it could buy another company similar in size to Google. So it would have to buy IBM. It would have to buy Apple. It would have to buy Microsoft. Companies that are similar in size. And this is what we learned here in this particular thing. If M31 Andromeda had to have such a large debris of stars around it, it could not have been built up by eating small, small galaxies, because there are not enough of them. You really need to eat a really large galaxy like the Milky Way. So I'm coming back to this old image, which I says, what do mergers do to galaxies? What I learned in my astronomy books in 1977, when two galaxies merge of the similar two disk galaxies, they become a giant glob of stars, an elliptical galaxy. What I showed was, no, this is not true. That when two galaxies merge, you can see this M81 and M82, they are merging, it's the galaxies. They come closer and closer, like in the M51, M51b pair. The end result is that the galaxy may be able to retain its shape. This is completely a new knowledge. And this is how science is done. You take what we know and you challenge it. You try to see its limits, and you try to increase the body of knowledge. This is what research is. This is what we do in astronomy, but it is similarly in every other field. And what I would like to convey to everyone is that, yes, when we do teach our kids, we have to give them this thirst for knowledge, but also a taste of what science is. Science is not a bunch of laws you read in a book. Science means research. Science means expanding knowledge. Let me move then to the third point, which I will go very briefly, is that science and religion are compatible. It would take me hours to describe how science and religion are compatible, and one of my favorite topics that I often talk about. But for today, I will quickly pass over this topic by showing you persons who were priests or members of the church and did great discoveries in astronomy, at least in the field which I know about. This to demonstrate to you that science and religion can go together. So the first one I want to show you is Father Christopher Clavius. He was the professor of Galileo Galilei. He was the one who reformed the Gregorian calendar. And he was actually responsible for the calendar which we have today. And one of his aims was to understand how to predict the dates of Easter. So I'm showing you an extract from his book. And you can see, right, in this extract from the book, it goes up to 2019. This is a talk from last year, but there is the next page. It goes up to 2050, where he predicts the dates of Easter for each day. So it needs a precise understanding of the position of the sun, the position of the moon to predict the dates of Easter. He was one of the first Jesuits to study astronomy. The second one I will talk about today is Father Francesco Grimaldi. To give you a glimpse, Father Francesco Grimaldi is actually famous for a number of discoveries. But one thing which really appeals to me is that he was one of the first to draw a map of the moon. Looking through his telescope, he was first to draw a map of the moon and to start making an atlas of it. So he started naming the craters he saw on the moon. And because he was a Jesuit, he named 45 of them after his Jesuit friends, St. Ignatius of Loyola, as well as the others in there. So today we have about 45 craters on the moon named after Jesuits, thanks to Father Francesco Grimaldi. The third person I like to talk about is Father Agnello Secchi, an Italian priest. Agnello Secchi, before the time of Agnello Secchi, he lived in the 19th century. Whenever people looked up at the night sky, they only were interested in the motion of the stars and the planets. Nobody ever asked the question, what are the stars made up of? And is the star like our sun? Father Agnello Secchi was the first to actually answer this question. And basically, he looked at the sun, he took a spectrum of it, he took the light of the sun and broke it up into its colors. He took the light of the stars, broke up into its colors, and he showed that the spectrum of the sun was similar to the spectrum of the stars. And more than that, he began to hypothesize what is present on the sun and what is present in the stars. So in a sense, he is the father of astrophysics, understanding the physics of the stars. The last person I want to talk about is this person named as Father Georges Lemaitre, a Belgian diocesan priest, who was a contemporary of Albert Einstein. Now, Georges Lemaitre took the laws of general relativity of Albert Einstein and applied them to the universe. And he realized, along with his colleagues, that the universe was expanding. It was expanding. He could see the galaxies were moving away from each other. And if you actually extrapolated backwards in time, it meant that the universe started from a single point. And he called this one the primordial atom, which today we would call as the Big Bang. So the originator of the theory of the Big Bang was a Belgian Catholic priest. If ever there is a very Catholic idea, it is the idea of the Big Bang. But in showing you these number of figures, there are many more, I wanted to give you a taste of how people through history were able to reconcile their faith and make advances in science. They were great priests, members of the church, but they were also great scientists who made substantial discoveries. And this is what we continue today at the Vatican Observatory, which is here based in Rome. But we also have a small outstation in Arizona, in Tucson, in the United States, in the United States, and a mountain very high up, where we have our telescope there. And we are a bunch of 15 Jesuit priests and brothers entrusted with the work by the Pope, by the Holy Father, to show that science and religion can go together.
Thank you, Father. Thank you, Father. Thank you so much. You just gave us a virtual tour of how our galaxies really are. And I must tell you this, you are a wonderful storyteller. If I close my eyes, I could just think about galaxies day in and day out. Thank you so much, Father. It was wonderful to hear from you. And you just took us to a different galaxy altogether. I would say literally, figuratively, and metaphorically. Thank you so much, sir. Samira, over to you. Samira, you're on mute. The most common words you'll hear in this call today is mute.
Father, I think you were on mute. Can you hear us now, Father Richard?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Father Richard, for such explanation and to understand this in detail. And it's really overwhelming, and we look forward to your views during our panel discussion as well. It is now my proud honor and privilege, to introduce someone who has made a remarkable difference in our society. Whenever I think of him as the common man's bishop. You know why? Because I feel that, he can resonate with everyone. It's not just the rich, it's not just the affluent, it's not just those people with good communication skills. I also learned that when he took charge of his office, that is, the Bangalore Archdiocese, for all those who are non-Christians, who are also tuned in to today's session, to let you know, about the Bangalore Archdiocese. When we had our Reverend Bishop who took charge, I think one of the first things he had done is reach out, go out in the nights and look at those sleeping on the road. And just to share with all of you, that is something that personally touched me. When a man with such power, privilege, has already, been consecrated and nominated and has taken charge, to actually, use that as the first step to reach out to all those in need. That also reminds me of something from the Holy Bible, which says, humble yourself before the Lord, and he will lift you up in honor. And I think that is something that is a part of S factor. Humility, kindness. My dear friends out here, all of us are educated. All of us are knowledgeable. All of us come from good families and backgrounds. And maybe that is one of the reasons we are tuning in together. But I would like to start by asking all of us this question, which is the crux of the S factor. Are we using God's given talent, skill, knowledge, education, networks to reach out to those in need? I also want to tell you very quickly that, not just reaching out to the poor and marginalized, but, under his leadership during COVID-19, they were one of the first to come out and take great strides forward, telling the community and the world at large, if you need help, contact this number. We are available for you 24/7. Be it a hospital, the oxygen cylinders, the masks, the PPE kits, or even helping with the COVID burials. And I think that for us is the true essence of leadership. So without further ado, it is my proud privilege and honor to welcome Most Reverend Dr. Peter Machado, the Archbishop of Bengaluru, to the S Factor talk show. We are honored to have you on board. Over to you, Your Grace. I request you to kindly unmute yourself.
So, my dear Father Richard D'Souza, Shekhar Vijayan, Father Victor Lobo, Sister of Mount Carmel, Sister, I see so many others, Samira herself, so many others that are there on the screen. I feel myself very humble that when Father Richard is looking at the stars, I'm just looking down only. And Samira said something about being common, etc. I think that's why Richard is in the skies and we are still looking at the dust here. And ironically, as Father Richard, I must say that in all humility, I know him a little because we were together in Belgaum when he was 2-3 years in the community college there. And also he was preparing to go to Rome. And I had known by then that if he was going to Rome and be in the observatory of the Vatican, looking at the skies, I don't know whether he'll come back, I said. He might be very close to the Pope and explain to the Pope all the time about the stars and the scriptures. I liked about what he said about how to combine science and faith. You know, today's gospel speaks about faith. The little people's faith in small things, but faith is an assurance that God will not abandon us. And that is why the skies are a proof. You know, your beautiful psalms by the psalmists who perhaps may not have had telescopes, but their hearts were beating hard because everything that they saw in the skies, they praised God. Psalm 33, 6-9 says, "The Lord merely spoke and the heavens were created. He breathed the word and all the stars were born." The stars and the galaxies that Father Richard is speaking now were born when God spoke. Psalm 8, verse 3-4 and 6-8 says, "When I consider heavens," there's a beautiful hymn, "when I consider the heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is mankind that you be mindful of them? You made them rulers over the works of your hands," and so on. I think these are beautiful words which the psalmist says and strengthens our faith. You know, when we are, surely not all of us can be astronauts, astrophysicists, but then to admire what God has done up and down below, perhaps that would be the greatest satisfaction for us to accept that God is above us. And the creation of God can never be completed. The creation of God can never be completely discovered, as it were, as day after day, scientists like Father Richard and so many others are discovering. But in spite of that, the height of virtue is our humility. To say that anything and everything that we know is just a speck, just a speck. You know, like the scientists today are also studying this virus of the COVID. And they say it's just a small speck that has done such a big harm to the whole mankind. Who knows where it came from, whether China or some other country. It doesn't matter, but just a tiny, tiny speck that has made such a big harm. And so also, the other side, when we look up, we see that every speck that we see is a galaxy. That's what Father Richard tells us. And these galaxies put together is the universe that God has created. I think Stephen Hawking said, our astrophysicist who died just a year ago, to confine our attention to the terrestrial matters would be to limit the human spirit. That's true. We can't stop at only the terrestrial matters. We have to look up, admire, praise, and bless God for all his goodness. I don't want to take much time except express my appreciation to Father Richard for his wisdom, for all the Jesuits. As we have seen, there are so many Jesuits who have taken interest before them. And I'm happy that the present generation of Jesuits are also interested in these studies, in these things that perhaps we may consider as not so important, but then you show it to us that it's very important to know our nature, to see our skies, to know the background from where we came from, and at the same time, what's our destination. So I thank Samira and all the others who have organizers, who have organized this. And I thought I should come on the screen also, not only to hear, but also to see Father Richard's face, at least from so far away, and bless God for the good work that he's doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for your very inspiring note. And we've also got a very interesting guest who's joined us. So before we introduce the next guest, I'm sure every second person here must have studied or played some role in St. Joseph's College. So if you have, please put a message in the message box, because I know quite a few here who studied there, who have taught there, who have been a part of this very interesting institution. So on that note, I'm going to introduce Dr. Father Victor Lobo, SJ. He's a principal of St. Joseph's College. Interestingly, he also received an award from the Honorable Chief Minister of Karnataka in recognition of the college adopting 18 government schools at a special function held on 24th of November 2020. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce him and welcome him on board on this wonderful talk show. Can we get Mr. Victor Lobo, sir? So we would love you to come in and speak a few words.
Your Grace.
He was the earliest to join us, by the way. He was the first person to join us.
Your Grace, Dr. Peter Machado, the Archbishop of Bangalore, Sister Spana, Dr. Alphonse Prabhakar, a Josephite and former scientist at ISRO, our hosts, Samira and Shekhar, and the center of the show, Father Richard D'Souza. Good evening to you all.
Good evening.
Dear friends, I'm blessed as an Indian, as a Jesuit, and as an educationist to associate myself with my distinguished fellow Jesuit, Father Richard D'Souza, who is studying the formation and evolution of galaxies, and in particular, the outer stellar halos of galaxies, in order to decipher their accretion histories, and has discovered how 2 billion years ago, Andromeda, the Milky Way, cannibalized and destroyed its sibling, leaving behind a trail of cosmic debris as evidence. I'm deeply impressed and I'm really in awe. For a cursory glance to the curriculum vitae of Father D'Souza has convinced me that education in general and Jesuit education in particular has a tremendous potential to bring out the best in the individuals and even enable them to scale the peaks of excellence in their chosen fields. The Jesuit formation has led Father Richard to find a unique balance between faith and science, spirituality and study, the transcendent and the contingent. As he himself told the Times of India some time ago, faith and science are two very fundamental ways of knowing the same reality. Humanity needs both these ways of knowing to understand reality and to move forward in life. Science is based on faith and assumptions, especially in astronomy, where it is very difficult to prove something exactly, and much really goes on assumptions and beliefs. Science cannot offer us meaning in life, only something that is totally transcendental, like the divine can. Without meaning, we will not move forward. We will not have hope. We will not strive to do things we do. And without hope, people have nothing to look forward to. religion and faith gives us meaning, and it often gives us a pretty good reason to do good science because it becomes an expression of reaching out to this transcendent that is God. Hence, for scholars like Father D'Souza, spiritual life and research work interweave seamlessly. It is this fine integration of the academic, aesthetic, artistic, athletic, affective, moral, professional, communitarian, and social dimensions of the human person that education strives to achieve. And educational leadership is all about inspiring, initiating, and intensifying such a process. It is more a companionship than commanding, convincing than compelling, walking together than forging ahead. It is a sharing of dreams with a fellow pilgrim than an imposition of dogmatic propositions. It is empathetic listening. A good teacher is also a good listener who listens carefully to what her students say through various channels of communication, even non-verbal. Moreover, an effective teacher knows the treasures hidden in her pupils. She can then build on what is already present in them. That is the literal meaning of education, drawing out. This process of discovering, drawing out, and developing the hidden potential in the students is primarily carried out not by words, but by work. For the educational leadership to be truly effective, it needs to show itself in deeds, not merely in words. One needs to lead by example and not merely by exhortation and eloquence alone. This was starkly in evidence during the recent second wave of the pandemic, when some leaders, particularly in the political field, sought to hoodwink the people with empty rhetoric, devoid of all practical outreach. This was in sharp contrast with many other leaders, especially from the academic field, who silently ventured out into the field, ministering to the raw wounds of a bruised and battered humanity. Therefore, a deep sense of empathy, sharing of ethos, the cosmos, and the pathos of people, especially of our students, understanding their sensibilities and concerns from within, is a necessary prerequisite for an effective educational leader who needs to truly speak the language of the heart, especially in dealing with the suffering people. It is by being supportive without being intrusive that the leader treats people with compassion and respect, with a deep sense of empathy. Such a disposition reflects a fine blend of spirituality and science in understanding the world and instructing the students. An education leader, therefore, clearly interprets leadership in service. These are a few thoughts and reflections on academic leadership. Let us try to be inspiring educationists and leaders, thus making signal contributions to the deposit of the accumulated human knowledge, especially at the intersection of the faith and science, all at the service of God and his people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Father Victor. So I have to tell you this, we're getting a lot of messages on our message box and everybody's been talking about your personality. So I think the reason for that is you were the earliest to join our show. That is the reason. So, but on a more serious note, thank you so much. This was a very interesting keynote address which you just gave us, and it augurs well for the larger community. Thank you so much, and welcome to the S Factor Talk Show. The next person I'm calling on is Mr. C. Alphonse Prabhakar. He was the first person to join the show again. He joined it exactly at 3:50, if I'm not mistaken. And Samira might ratify that for me. Sir is a retired scientist in ISRO, and I'm going to go directly to his accomplishments and his awards because I think that's the most interesting aspect of his career. He won a Team Excellence Award for Excellence in 2007 for the Cartosat 2 mission. He got the ISRO Merit Award 2016 for Outstanding Individual Performance and Contribution for Indian Space Program. And interestingly, his hobbies are keeping abreast with space and defense news, carpentry, playing musical instruments. He knows how to play the guitar. He knows how to play the keyboard. He knows how to play the mouth organ. So we might make you sing a song at the end of this. He also loves baking, which he must have done during this pandemic, I'm sure. and he loves long distance driving. So anything in Bangalore, long distance driving is basically an oxymoron. He's presently engaged in helping all his old school and students academically and financially. So with great pleasure, we have Mr. Prabhakar, who's joining us on this wonderful forum. So we would love you to speak a few words.
Am I clearly audible?
Very audible,
okay.
Sir. We can hear you from the other galaxy.
Okay, fine. First of all, I would like to express my happiness and pleasure in getting acquainted with this webinar, mainly for our Grace the Archbishop gracing this function, and also great personality like for Father Richard giving this talk and getting us seated. And thanks to Father Victor Lobo and Samira for getting me into this webinar. Okay, so though I'm going to talk about space, it's not going to be far deep space like what Father Richard mentioned. Because I'm not an astronomer, I am a space technologist. And with an understanding of how satellites work and experience of how they are put into orbit by rockets, and basically even right from designing, making, launching, and making use of the satellites. And so our interests are more from a few hundred kilometers to maybe a few thousand kilometers in space. And though we are going to space, our interests are more down to earth. So we are down to earth people, especially in India and ISRO. We like to make use of the space products, the benefits of common man and benefits of the nation. And we have satellites in space with a good number of them for multiple purposes, like monitoring or imaging satellites, which monitor agriculture, forest resources, land utilization, city planning, forest fire monitoring, and so on. Plenty of them. And these we call as remote sensing satellites. And then next set of satellites, we have communication satellites, mainly meant for communication. They are launched at somewhere around 36,000 kilometers, and they're used for communication. And we also have a set of navigation satellites, which are used for regional navigation. Most of you may be aware of GPS systems. GPS systems are by US Air Force, which are orbiting at around 40,000 kilometers, and they're for global positioning. Their main application is military, but then as a offshoot use, they are providing it as a free service to the general public. And we also have our navigation satellite, and we have also satellites for pollution monitoring, and we have satellites for even stellar observations. Satellites like what we launched sometime back, about 5 years back, called AstroSat. AstroSat was actually a multi-wavelength observatory in different frequencies, like from high ultraviolet to far ultraviolet, near infrared, lower ultraviolet, and then hard X-rays and soft X-rays. And some of those pictures which Father Richard showed, similar pictures we were getting. In fact, when you compare those pictures from one to another, you will see the vast differences tangibly when you view them in different frequencies. And you infer about the stellar happenings. These are one sort of satellites. And we also have, to launch these satellites, we have multiple rockets, different types of rockets. You would have heard of the Polar Satellite launch with the GSLV-1, GSLV-2, GSLV Mark III, because we need different rockets to put the satellites into different orbits. And we have been having this satellite, these rockets grown from a very early stage, like what you call maybe 100 millimeter diameter or 10 centimeter diameter to about more than 3.2 meter diameter rockets. And from a few hundred kgs to few thousand kgs, a few thousand kg rockets. But then I would like to say that the Indian rocketry started in a church. Maybe some of you may be knowing that the rocketry or Indian space program originated in a church, that is a Mary Magdalene Church in a remote village, a fishing village called Tumba, little outside Trivandrum. Now that particular church is a big museum for ISRO, and I would request many of you, if some of you go to Trivandrum, take some trouble to visit that, because most of ISRO's achievements are showcased there. You can go and see. And this particular, possibly around, I think somewhere about 60 years back, we took birth in that place. And then ISRO has come a long way of launching quite a number of satellites. And now and it is continuing. Though we have all these satellites, and as I mentioned, we are down to earth people using the satellites and our rockets and our assets for services, for the common services. But then we also launch some programs. We go to the moon, we go to Mars, and they're planning for a mission to go even to orbit around the sun. Orbit around the sun, you'll be wondering, how can we orbit around the sun? Yes, there is a place called, there is a point called Lagrangian point, L1 point. Some of the science students might know this particular point where we can put a satellite, and along with the Earth, it will go about around the sun. This particular point is about 1.5 million kilometers away, and we have some rockets and satellites configured. The particular satellite called Aditya to go and study. But then what is the use of these missions? When you go to the moon, people already, many countries have gone to the moon, and then trying to go to Mars, and then trying to go to orbit around the sun. What are the use? Actually, these are the drivers for our engineers, like me, when I was working, to improve upon the challenges, because going to the moon the first time is not an easy joke. It was a big challenge. And these challenges drive you to the technological edge to push you to that extent where you have to miniaturize components. You have to reduce the size of the components. You have to give autonomy, or what you call intelligence systems to the satellite. That is where you can operate these satellites without intervention. When you know how to operate the satellite without intervention, then you have lots of satellites, then you can operate with a lot less people. And I'll tell you why we need to operate with less people also, these satellites. So these missions, like going to, going to the moon. And you know one thing, our Chandrayaan-1 was, though so many people have reached, so many countries have reached moon, and then brought samples. But I am proud to say that Chandrayaan-1 was the first one to detect water. And similarly, this Mars mission had so much of technological advances and intelligence system built in. Because of that, we were the first country to reach Mars in the very first attempt, where all other countries had failed. And these advantages are actually put into our other satellites, communication satellites, navigation satellites, and remote sensing satellites, to our advantage. Because these drivers produce a new type of, or a new advanced technology, or new breed of technologies, which are again used back and fed into our operational satellites, which are actually the bread and butter of ISRO. Because against these satellites only, we make a lot of money, we bring in a lot of advantages. Yeah. Then I would like to also tell new trends in satellites. Now, the older satellites, with the older concept of launching very huge satellites, will become only the government, what do you call it, the purview of the governments, like NASA launches huge satellites, or ESA, or the European SIS launches. Now, a lot of private companies are coming in, and they are launching swarms, because these private companies want to make money. Like, for example, there is a company called OneWeb. OneWeb wants to launch 648 satellites all around the globe to provide internet. That is the internet to even the remotest place. Possibly many of you may be aware that right now internet is not actually by satellites. In fact, very less load is through satellites. But most of the internet and then our phone communication, even our ISD communication, are by optical fibers laid in the undersea cables, undersea optical cables. But then there are, and for the last mile connectivity only, you have the towers, the microwave towers or the cell phone towers you have. But what about some remote places? Like, say, shipping lanes. If you are in a ship, can you be there in a ship for days together without internet connection? Nowadays, it's very difficult. So, though they need internet connection and they are provided with satellites. But what about people in desert? What about soldiers in a forward area or in border areas? So there are lots of people in very isolated areas where you don't have this internet tower, the connection, or towers for mobile towers. You don't have internet connection, last mile connectivity. So for which this OneWeb is a private company joined together with a lot of people, private people have come together and they have decided to launch around 648 satellites to provide high-speed internet data to everyone and every part of the world. And every part of the world. And this has put a lot of pressure on people. How do you control? Because you need a team to control 640, more than 600 satellites.
So, Mr. Prabhakar, sir, so we would, so you've given us a masterclass on ISRO and everything around it. And there is so much of technical knowledge we have on this particular show. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for telling us so much about ISRO and the work which is done. I think it's a matter of great honor for us that you are on a show like this and talking about it. Can everybody, please show your appreciation in various ways if you can. If you could clap for him, applaud him, because I think he's speaking from his heart. When you speak from your heart, you really forget about time. And unfortunately, time is the only thing which is constantly changing here. And on that timely note, Samira, over to you.
Thank you, Shekhar, and really amazing Dr. C. Alphonse Prabhakar, who is the former scientist of ISRO, for being with us today and also giving us a highlight of what exactly, not just what ISRO is doing, but also on space technology, which I think is something that we really need to look at and pay attention to, since the whole world is into new horizons, exploring, and maybe finding out another residence, not just in another part of the world, but in another planet to even stay on. So thank you for talking and outlining space technologies to us at the same time.
And we are getting a lot of messages on the message box also. People are complimenting the session. They're talking about it being an excellent session. And to all the panelists, thank you, Samira. Yeah.
Well, I also need to add, for the benefit of not just the panelists, but for the audience as well, I request the panelists to come a bit closer to the mic, because all those who have tuned in here are from colleges, institutions, and companies all across the world, right from London to the UAE. I think we also have someone from Japan who has taken time off to sign in. And I need to admit, we have Father Richard D'Souza, our doctor and scientist and astronomer as well, who has tuned in from Rome to start with. I would now like to, move on to a very proud moment for me, being a Carmelite. It is my honor to also highlight a beautiful institution that I not just was, but I still feel I'm a part of. It's so much within me for about 5 years that I was there in Mount Carmel, I think decades ago. It was so beautiful because I was president of the CSA, the Catholic Student Association, and I think I was a very naughty young girl. So because I had very strict parents, sorry, daddy and mummy, I'm not talking about your parental skills, because today my children are going to say the same thing. But I think because of the strictness of my parents not being allowed to go out, coming back on time, not wearing jeans, and so many. Yeah, I think what happened is I took the liberty of the CSA and the ICAF to take people and the wonderful classmates from my batch and from the college and from St. Joseph and Christ College, different parts of India. So we went to Mumbai, we went to Chennai, we went to Mangalore, and so many other places, reaching out and talking to different people in society. What I believe Mount Carmel has is a cradle of leadership. Everything about them is all about contributing to empower. We have Dr. Sister Arpana with us, who is the principal of Mount Carmel College. And I must admit, as she has taken under her leadership, the college has gone to great strides where, apart from just empowering women through education, they have introduced something very different which is relevant to us today, which is a choice-based credit system. And do you know what that means? The choice-based credit system. It means that apart from the course you are taking, you can select any one subject from a different stream. And isn't that amazing that if you have taken commerce, you can still select some alternate subject which is of interest? And I think, our quest to have unconventional courses, space exploration, technologies, or many other facets could hopefully come into effect also with the new education policy. It's our proud honor, Dr. Sister Arpana, that you're with us. Over to you.
Thank you, Samira, and we are also very proud of you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Your Grace, Most Reverend Dr. Peter Machado, Archbishop of Bengaluru, distinguished luminaries on this panel, and esteemed members of the academic and non-academic fraternity tuned into this talk show. A very good evening to you. As representative of the Xavier Board, the only association of all Catholic institutions of higher education in India, which stands for gospel values, excellence, and leadership through higher education, the mission is to educate each student intellectually, morally, and spiritually. We create learning opportunities through rigorous academic and professional programs integrated with co-curricular engagement. I am here to share my thoughts on holistic and inclusive education at Mount Carmel College. The journey of our institution since 1948 has been one dedicated to the cause of empowering through education. This is in keeping with the vision of our foundress, Mother Teresa of St. Joseph Lima, who realized the transformational role of education, particularly for women, way ahead of her times. It is impact of an ordinary life fueled by an extraordinary vision that helped build a community, one life at a time. Today, Mount Carmel College stands committed to be the torchbearers of quality, value-based, holistic education, which goes beyond the curriculum and the classrooms. We strongly believe that educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. Our institutions are known for imparting holistic education, influencing thinking, and facilitating pursuit of academic excellence, while simultaneously instilling human values, ethical principles, and social consciousness. We have integrated religion and value education into the mainstream curriculum, as we believe our youth, the future of our nation, need to be youth of integrity and character. Students are engaged in community outreach programs, a teaching learning strategy that integrates meaningful community service to enrich the learning experience, teach civic responsibility, and strengthen communities. Education is a life-changing experience that empowers an individual to make the world a better place. Hence, it is important that our education institutions focus on building an ecosystem that promotes comprehensive multidisciplinary learning, and most importantly, makes education accessible to all. Over time, the demographic profile of our students has been transforming, to encompass a diversified student community. To this day, we continue to educate many first-generation learners with a hope to brighten their future. Our admission policy is sensitive to the students from marginalized sections, and we offer a large number of free shifts and scholarships to students. Mentoring and counseling help students to assimilate the campus culture. Bridge and skill-based courses augments their confidence and competency. And schemes like Earn While You Learn encourage them to be financially independent. This holistic, inclusive education provides wings to the dreams of young India and builds a strong nation. Education has evolved and progressed in the recent years, bringing in different notions of learning, classrooms, curriculum, and pedagogies. With changing learning environments and expectations, the dynamics of classrooms management has changed. The concept of the 4 C's, the 21st century, skills of critical thinking, collaboration, communication, and creativity suggest the need for more integrated, hands-on, problem and inquiry-based approaches to the teaching learning process. Institutions are expected to impart marketable skills that prepare students for the competitive world of work. With these factors driving monumental shifts, there is an urgent need to redesign degree programs, courses, and curricula in general to meet the needs of modern learners. As an autonomous college, we have the flexibility and academic freedom to restructure the curriculum and launch value-added programs. There is a rapid adoption of corporate partnership programs to bridge the gap between academia and industry. Trust on research, even at the UG level, is encouraged to develop a research culture and a scientific temper. Focus on innovation and entrepreneurship is also gaining importance in the present scenario of higher education. With the implement of NEP in the near future, we have an open mind to adopt new programs. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. In anticipation of the support of ISRO could extend, we are more than willing to introduce space exploration as part of our curriculum. So let us reach out for the stars. It is our nature and it's our destiny. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Sister Aparna. And thank you to all the panelists who have joined us today. Now, we won't let you go so easily. Now that we have got principals, we've got people joining in from Japan and from all parts of the world. We have got a very simple group activity which we're going to do. And I would love, so it's very simple. There are no marks for this. And we ask you a question, you just tell me honestly what comes to your mind, the first thing which comes to your mind. And that's all there is to it. We're going to ask the panelists this question and everybody else can put their answers in the message box. Right, Samira, your game?
Yes, Shekhar, very much. And may I also request all the panelists to kindly unmute themselves and also hopefully show themselves on the video because it's something that we can play together.
Yeah. If we could get everybody on video, this is going to be another galaxy altogether. We would love all of you to come on video quickly. And we're going to start the session in the next few seconds, that is. So this first question goes out to all the panelists, but I will start with Father Richard, because he's out there in Rome. So, you know, one of the most beautiful places I visited in India was Andaman and Nicobar Island. And now, you know, because the world is in different throes of the pandemic, one place you would want to visit. Like the most beautiful place you've visited and why?
The most beautiful place I have visited is the Alps here in Europe. They are very high. They're probably like, I have never been to the Himalayas. I never had the opportunity to actually hike in the Himalayas. But here in Europe, it is easy to hike up. And the best part is when you are hiking during a day when it's cloudy.
Oh, yes.
But you go above the clouds and you can suddenly see above the clouds. That was one of the most beautiful experiences I've had.
Thank you, sir. So, you know, we have the Desi version of this in Bangalore called the Nandi Hills, which is almost as foggy as Alps, but not as high as Alps. But I'm sure we don't get the same experience, but that's what makes Bangalore special. Thank you, sir. Mr. Prabhakar, we would love to know from you, sir.
Please go ahead.
Yes, sir. The same
question. Okay. okay. Actually, I also like to visit Andaman and Nicobar Islands. I visited already twice. I really like. And another place which I always wanted to visit was Leh, which I could not make it. That's my next target.
Thank you, sir. So the two places you mentioned are very pristine. And I must tell this to everybody out here. If you have not been to Andaman Nicobar Islands, you should go there, because I think there is a particular beach called the Ramnagar Beach, which is one of the most beautiful beaches, not just in India, but in the world. So we should go there and visit that place. It's extremely beautiful.
And every beach in Andaman is different.
Absolutely, sir. Samira, what about you?
I'm very happy with Bangalore, Shekhar. So, I'm pretty relaxed here at the moment.
So, Mr. Arch, we've also got the Archbishop here. So we would love to know from you, sir.
Hi, I come from the coastal district of Karwa and also little of Belgaum. And so I like nature, beautiful forests, and Karwa also has got beautiful beaches, the rivers, the good fish there. I think I'm happy with that. I can't go to Andaman, at least at this age, I may not come back. So I'm happy here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So, but I can tell you this, wherever you are, our Indian Navy Air Force will pick you up. Don't worry about that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sister Aparna, we would love to know from you too.
I think we should move on to Father Victor.
Yeah. Father Victor?
Yes. I like Bangalore and St. Joseph's College, but our students have been to Andaman and Nicobar, and they've expressed that, as you said, the beautiful place. So why not? Next visit, we'll try to go to Andamans.
Thank you, sir. So much. I think we've covered, Samira, we've covered everybody, all our guests.
Yes, Shekhar. And I'm just waiting for your next question now.
Okay. Samira, one person you would love to meet and have dinner with.
Oh my God.
The people here on this call, okay?
Sorry?
One person you would love to meet and have dinner with. You know, somebody from history. Like, we've spoken about so many people, right? In the last 1 hour.
Yeah, I think I'm a diehard fan, and Roger Waters would be someone that I would really like to meet. Yeah.
Roger Waters, with or without the guitar?
Better, it's safer and better if he brings his guitar along. We can at least spend the night singing.
Thanks, Samira. Father Richard, what about you?
It's difficult to say. Here in Rome, I'm fascinated by a painter whose name is Caravaggio. Probably some of you have seen. He was a very colorful personality. He got into fights a lot, but when you see his painting, you can immediately recognize it's a Caravaggio. I would love to meet him and dinner with him. It would be an interesting conversation to understand his way of looking at lights and shadows. I love art. And really would love to know more, get to know him better.
So dinner with him up in the Alps. So we got him.
Sorry, in the Alps, yes.
Up in the Alps. Might be making it in the hills. Mr. Prabhakar, sir.
Yes, I would like to have dinner with one of my old teachers. One of my old teachers, preferably with one Reuben Hart, sir, because he taught me a lot of things. Yes, I value it.
That's nice, sir. Hopefully this message goes out to Mr. Reuben and he has dinner with you the next day, with or without the mask, that is, sir. Thank you. And Mr. Peter, sir, Archbishop, sir, from you, who would you love to have dinner with? Excluding us, that is.
It's a hard question because I know that I would like to eat with many people, but I don't know whether they would like to eat with me now because I'm quarantined here. But all the same, I know since Richard is in Rome, we hear so many things about the Holy Father, Pope Francis. I wish I could not have a lunch or dinner, but at least get a chance to meet and talk to him because he's a humble man. He's really a man of God.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. So I think we virtually made this possible for you. So we can take a little bit of credit for this. Yes, Samira, over to you.
So Shekhar, there's something that I always wanted to ask each and every panelist, especially on the S Factor. Maybe today I have the liberty of asking. Should I go ahead, Shekhar?
All yours.
But don't blame me for killing the show, okay? I'm not going to be held responsible for that.
No problem.
My question to our esteemed panelist is, can you tell us something about yourself which no one really knows about? You know, a secret or something that, you know, maybe only you know. So,
and I think once we know it, 54 of us will know it.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do.
So I would like to start, I would like to start by sharing something about myself, which I don't think anyone knows, or I gather so. I completed my 7th grade Trinity College London piano, and I had the H1N1, and I had just come out of the hospital, and for some reason, you know, I was so prepared for the exam, and my fingers were all frozen, and I just could not play for the exam. And I think that is when I kind of gave up, saying that, you know, at least I've made it to the exam. I've kind of studied everything. I'm going to miss out on a certificate. And I just gave up at that time. And it was a moment that I will always remember for my whole life, because I worked so hard, 2 years for the exam, and 20 days, you know, 10 days in the hospital, fingers were numb. I was so weak, and I said, that's it. So I think that's something I just wanted to share with you all. Now I would like to start by asking Father Victor, tell us something, Father.
Okay. To tell you, I never wanted to become a priest.
Oh.
in fact, I didn't want, and I didn't attend any camps. In fact, I wanted to get into film industry, but somehow parish priest convinced me to join. So I told him that I know that if I go for camps, they would convince you to become a priest. I did not go for the camp. Somehow he convinced me to go to the camp. I became a priest. I feel it's a miracle.
Amazing, Father, and lovely for you to share something so personal with us at the S Factor. I think we really appreciate that. And thank you for having the humility to do so. I would like to move on to ask Dr. Richard D'Souza, all the way from Rome.
So it's not very much of a secret. I have mentioned this in a few occasions, but probably none of you will know this. When I finished my doctorate and I passed with flying colors, and I moved on to my next position, after doing some more research, I realized that 1/3 of my doctorate was wrong. And I remember that was a day when I realized this, and I had to preach the next day in church. And I couldn't concentrate on the homily, but I was like trying to fix or trying to see where the loophole was. And I went up into public and I excused myself and I said, you know, I'm sorry, today's homily is not going to be a great thing. I'm trying to grapple with the fact that 1/3 of my thesis is wrong. It was in a parish in the University of Michigan, where all of them were professors, and they were shell-shocked that somebody would come up and publicly admit that 1/3 of their degree was wrong. It was a big blow to me, but I like to point out that this is what science is. It's you prove what you knew, you unlearn what you learned in the past, and you try and realize where you learned the mistakes, and you go ahead. That's my shameful moment.
Thank you for sharing that. Lovely to know and hear, and yet you went ahead. Thank you, Dr. Father Richard D'Souza, for that. Over to you, Mr. Prabhakar.
Thank you for giving so much time. I could really think, because initially I thought I don't have anything which is a total secret. But when I was young, I always wanted to sing, but I was a little not sure of myself singing. Then slowly, I started singing the hymns at home and in the church. And then I later sang for the choir also in some of the churches and then at the weddings. But still, I could never bring to myself to sing these common songs. Even when I play the guitar, I play either the lead or rhythm for somebody to sing. Even now, I don't sing. I can't sing. I don't know. I have not come up to that to sing. This is one secret.
Beautiful.
Share with you all.
Beautiful sharing. And who do we have left? I guess I've finished everyone. I think I've asked everyone, Shekhar. Shekhar, I forgot you, my co-host. Shekhar, I'm not going to give up this time, so don't pass it on. Tell me a secret which I don't know about.
So my mom is also on this call, so I'll tell you the secret. The secret is very simple. As an entertainer, I travel around the world entertaining people, and I'm extremely scared of turbulence in the flights. But I also have done skydiving, so it's an oxymoron in itself. I've done skydiving at 15,000 feet, but I'm also scared of turbulence. And when turbulence happens, I start talking a lot to the person next to me. So as we notice, as I'm talking a lot, I think there's turbulence all around me. But on a lighter note, but yeah, that's an oxymoron. I'm scared of turbulence, but I've done skydiving, so it's something.
Hats off to you. I would also like to request Your Grace, share with us something we are really interested to know.
When I heard Father Victor, I also remember a small secret which perhaps people do not know. I almost discontinued my priestly studies. A year before my ordination, I requested to be given a space so that I could, the situation at home was not very good. My father had just retired. I was the eldest in the family. And perhaps I thought priesthood is not for me. But it was that bishop who, and my parents also pushed me and said, go ahead. And I think I am today a priest because of them. So this is something which I have kept for myself, but maybe this is God's plan also in some way, that God has blessed me in spite of my own unworthiness.
Thank you, sir.
Really amazing for you to share, because that shows, the human, the person, and someone that we can really connect with, Your Grace. Thank you for that. And on that note, I would like to thank each and every one of you for being here, for being a part of the S Factor. As you all know, this is a new talk show, a global talk show that we have come up with. In the first month of its launch, we have had over 25 key influencers. I'm not going to call them celebrities. I'm not going to call them anything else. But for us, they are leaders in their fields of interest who have taken, time out in their leadership to share insights with the community. This is a non-profit initiative for the benefit of our community to show the world that if the people that we have here can inspire, can touch lives, and make a difference in whatever they do, I think all of us can. So without further ado, I would like to thank all our panelists for being here. Your Grace, Most Reverend Peter Machado, the Archbishop of Bengaluru. We also have with us Dr. Father Victor Lobo, Mr. Prabhakar, our scientist and astronomer who we are really proud of, and congratulations, keep flying high, and the whole world, Bengaluru is here to support you. I'm not going to talk about the live streams, the number of views and likes on our channels, because it's really been overwhelming. But Dr. Father Richard D'Souza, thank you for showcasing the hard work that you're doing, and for going beyond. Also, a special thanks to Dr. Sister Arpana, who was really held up today with too many sessions, but yet I really appreciate the way she's taken time off to be with us here today, despite everything her way. And before I end with humble thanks, I would like to thank our live streaming partners. We have Jude DeBon, who has come on with the Zoom. We have the Bangalore Archdiocese, who have gone all out to promote this because they believe in reaching out beyond with good leadership. And also the Redemptorist Media Center. We have Father Sandeep and Father Charles from the Redemptorist Media Center and his team. Also to Father Cyril from the Bangalore Archdiocese, who have been really supporting. A special word of thanks to also Mr. Kantaraj, the PRO of Bangalore Archdiocese, who's really leading the way and guiding the lay and the religious together. I now pass it over to my co-host Shekhar to continue.
Thank you, Samira. And like Samira said, I think it was a wonderful session. We have had 51 of us on the session for the last 1.5 hours, which just goes to show the quality of the people who joined in and the quality of the conversations we had. And we got to know everything about them in the last 1.5 hours, especially what they want to do on an alternate career and what their pet likes and dislikes are. But on the most serious note, thank you so much, everybody. It's wonderful to connect with all of you, wonderful to collaborate with all of you. This is the S Factor Talk Show, and this is our 8th episode, and we've got very interesting episodes coming up. And I would like to thank our supporters, people who partnered with us on this journey. We've got EcoSoul Global, we've got Shavens Entertainment, we've got Do Dibon, we've got Bhupalam Botanicals, we've got Chicada Media, we've got I Am Here, we've got Eat Raja, we've got Threadworks, Elephant Marketing, Sunshine Bakers, eTransform, Pepper, and Jagriti Education. And last but certainly not the least, thank you to everybody, to all our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much. And to all the wonderful people who have joined in on video and on audio and who are listening to us on this wonderful day. Thank you so much.
And before we end today's show, can we request all of you to kindly be on your videos, on your phones or laptops for just a moment as we take a screenshot of being together with each other, celebrating today's momentous special day and occasion. And I think the best part is, I should admit, people from different parts of the globe. We have at least representatives from 20 countries on today's show. We have people representing from different education institutions all across different sectors, a very secular place coming together. So I think it's been a wonderful experience for all of us. I hope I've given you time to be ready. Yeah. So at the count of 3, may I request all of you to unmute yourselves, and can we all put a thumbs up and say the S Factor together?
You could use both the thumbs also if you want, not just one.
Shaker, I think we're asking for too much. But at the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. The S Factor.
S Factor.
Jesus. Jesus. Jesus.
And on behalf of all of us here, we wish you all the best. Keep tuned in. This is a weekly show. So stay tuned, and we look forward to reaching out. For those who want their certificates, e-certificates, kindly leave your email ID and name on the chat box, and you will receive your e-certificates tomorrow. All the best. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you. And on behalf of Shaker Vijayan and myself, goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy. All of you.
Thank you, and bye-bye.